The silence started 3 days after my wedding. No fight, no argument, no dramatic scene. Just nothing. My daughter, Emily, stopped answering my calls. At first, I told myself she needed time. Second, marriages are complicated, especially when you're 62 and your daughter is 34. But time passed. 1 week, 2, then a month. And silence became something heavier. Maybe she's just adjusting. My new wife, Sandra, said gently. Sandra was patient, warm. You could mistake her calmness for kindness. And most days I did. Emily had always been close to me. After her mother died, it was just the two of us for years. We built a quiet, dependable life. Sunday dinners, long phone calls, shared routines. When I told her I was remarrying, she smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. She seems distant, Sandra had said back then. She'll come around, I replied confidently. I believed that. I needed to. Then one evening my phone buzzed. A text from Emily. Not warm, not casual, just 5 words. I know what she did. My chest tightened instantly. What she did. Did what? I called her immediately. Straight to voicemail. Again. Voicemail. I drove to her apartment that night. She opened the door but didn't invite me in. Her face was pale. Hurt. Angry. Dad? She said quietly. How long have you known? Known what? I asked. She stared at me like I had already betrayed her. About Sandra and Mom. The air left my lungs. What are you talking about? She stepped aside reluctantly. Inside, her laptop sat open on the kitchen table. Photos on the screen. Old ones. Very old. And one of them made my knees weak. Because I recognized the woman standing beside my late wife. Sandra, 20 years younger. Smiling. That was before you met her, I said automatically. Emily didn't blink. No, she said quietly. That was 2 months before Mom filed for separation. My mind went blank. Separation? My wife and I never separated. We argued. We struggled. But we never separated. Emily turned the laptop toward me. More documents. Emails. Printed screenshots. The date stamps were undeniable. Sandra and my late wife had worked together briefly. At a consulting firm. The same period when my marriage was at its worst. Why didn't you tell me you knew her back then? Emily demanded. I could barely process the question. Because I didn't know. Or had I? Memory is strange. It fills gaps with certainty. Until something shakes it. I met Sandra at the grief support group, I said. That's what she told you, Emily replied quietly. The difference between those 2 sentences felt dangerous. And there's more, she added. Those words never bring relief. Only layers. She showed me an old message. From my late wife. Sent to a friend. Dated 3 months before her diagnosis. It read, I don't trust her. Something feels wrong. My heart pounded. Because if my wife didn't trust Sandra, why was she standing beside her in those photos? Emily looked at me. You deserve to know the truth, she said. And in that moment, I realized something terrifying. This wasn't about jealousy. It wasn't about remarriage. My daughter believed my new wife had been in our lives long before I thought she was. And if that was true, then the story of how Sandra and I met wasn't just incomplete. It was a lie. I didn't sleep that night, not even for a minute. Every memory of meeting Sandra replayed in my head like a film I suddenly didn't trust anymore. The grief support group, coffee afterward, long conversations about loss, the slow comfort of being understood. It had all felt natural, accidental, fate even. But now one question kept repeating. What if it wasn't the first time she saw me? The next morning I asked Sandra directly, Did you know my late wife before we met? She froze, only for a second. But after 35 years of marriage, I learned something important. Truth rarely hesitates. Yes, she said quietly. The word landed harder than shouting. You told me you met me at the group, I said. I did, she replied carefully. But that wasn't the first time I knew who you were. My stomach tightened. She sat down across from me. No defensiveness. No panic. Just exhaustion. I worked with Linda briefly, she said, speaking my late wife's name softly. The room felt suddenly smaller. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. She looked down. Because of how we met again. That answer made no sense. Explain. We weren't friends, she continued. We barely interacted. Different departments. She paused. But your wife talked about you constantly. I didn't expect that. What do you mean? She loved you deeply, Sandra said. And she was terrified of losing you. My chest tightened. Because during that time our marriage had been struggling. Work stress. Financial pressure. Long silences at dinner. Things couples survive but barely. She thought you were unhappy, Sandra said. She believed she was failing you. That hurt to hear, because I remembered feeling lost then too. But we never spoke about it honestly. So why keep it secret from me now? I asked. Sandra hesitated. Because when we met again years later, you didn't recognize me. I blinked. You recognized me? She nodded slowly. I didn't say anything because you were grieving. I didn't want our relationship to feel complicated. The explanation sounded reasonable, almost comforting, yet something still felt unfinished. Emily found messages, I said. Sandra's expression changed. Not fear. Sadness. She would, she whispered. What does that mean? She stood up and walked to the bedroom, returned holding an old envelope. Yellowed edges. Unopened. She placed it in front of me. Your name was written on it. In Linda's handwriting. My heart stopped. This is from my wife. Sandra nodded. She gave it to me years ago. The room spun slightly. Why would she give you a letter for me? Sandra swallowed. Because she thought she might die. Couldn't breathe. Linda was diagnosed much later. Years later. This didn't make sense. She was afraid something was wrong long before doctors confirmed it, Sandra said gently. She asked me to give this to you if she ever couldn't. Why didn't you? I asked, voice shaking. Because she changed her mind, Sandra replied quietly. She told me she wanted to tell you herself. I stared at the envelope. My wife's handwriting. A message frozen in time. A conversation we never had. Why keep it all these years? I asked. Sandra's voice softened. Because after she passed, I didn't know if opening old wounds would help or destroy you. Everything felt unstable now. Not betrayal. Not innocence. Something far more complicated. I picked up the envelope but didn't open it. Fear stopped me. Because once truth is known, you can't return to certainty. Then Sandra said something that changed the direction of the story completely. I think Emily misunderstood why your mother distrusted me. My heart pounded. What do you mean? Sandra took a slow breath. Your wife didn't distrust me because of something I did. Pause. She distrusted me because of something she believed you were hiding. The room went silent. Because suddenly, the mystery wasn't about my new wife anymore. It was about me. And for the first time, I wondered whether the past I remembered was missing pieces I never allowed myself to see. I stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it. My late wife's handwriting felt alive under my fingers. Careful loops. Slight tilt to the right. She always rushed the last letter of every word. I knew those details better than my own signature. And suddenly I was afraid. Because this wasn't just a letter. It was a version of my marriage frozen in time. Do you want me to leave? Sandra asked quietly. I shook my head. No. If the truth was coming, I didn't want witnesses disappearing. I wanted honesty to stay in the room. The paper inside was folded twice. I unfolded it slowly. My name at the top. No date. Just words written like someone trying to say something before courage disappeared. Tom, if you're reading this, it means I didn't find the right moment to tell you myself. My chest tightened immediately. I think you're unhappy, and I don't know how to reach you anymore. The sentence hit harder than accusation ever could. Because I remembered that time. Long work hours. Silence at dinner. Answering questions with one-word replies. Convincing myself I was just tired. I found messages on your phone. I know they might mean nothing, but they made me realize how far apart we've become. My heart skipped. Messages. A faint memory surfaced. Coworker. Late-night project conversations. Harmless to me, but maybe not harmless to someone already afraid. I kept reading. Hands shaking now. I don't think you're cheating. I think you're lonely while sitting right beside me. The words blurred. Because loneliness inside marriage is harder to face than betrayal. I spoke to Sandra today. She listened when I couldn't talk to you. I looked up slowly. Sandra's eyes filled with tears. She was helping her through counseling resources, Sandra said softly. She asked me not to tell you. I nodded silently and continued reading. She told me something I didn't want to hear, that sometimes people don't leave marriages physically first. They leave emotionally. My throat tightened, because I remembered withdrawing. Not intentionally, just slowly, like someone stepping back without noticing distance growing. I'm scared that one day you'll realize you stopped loving me long before I realized it. I stopped reading. The room felt unbearably quiet, because grief suddenly changed shape. I hadn't just lost my wife. I had never fully understood her fear while she was alive. I didn't know she felt like this, I whispered. Sandra nodded gently. She didn't blame you. She blamed distance. I finished the letter. If something happens to me, promise you won't live alone forever. You deserve companionship, even if it isn't me. Just promise you'll be honest with yourself about what you need. At the bottom, I love you, even when we don't understand each other. The paper slipped slightly in my hands, because suddenly my second marriage didn't feel like betrayal. Felt like permission. Permission she gave long before I understood why. Emily's anger suddenly made sense. From her perspective, Sandra appeared suddenly after her mother's death. A stranger replacing someone irreplaceable. But she didn't know Sandra had once helped her mother hold the marriage together. I never wanted to replace her, Sandra said quietly. I just kept a promise she asked me to keep. The room felt different now. Not suspicious. Heavy with delayed understanding. But why didn't you tell Emily? I asked. Sandra hesitated. Because your wife asked me not to share the letter unless you were ready. Ready. That word again. Truth waiting for timing. Suddenly I understood something painful. My daughter wasn't angry because of betrayal. She was protecting her mother's memory. The same way I had protected my version of the past. I picked up my phone, hands still shaking, and called Emily. She answered immediately this time. Dad, I think we both misunderstood something, I said quietly. There was a long silence. Then she asked softly, what did you find? I looked at Sandra, then at the letter again, and realized this conversation would change our relationship forever. Because the hardest truth wasn't about who Sandra was. It was about who I had been, and how love sometimes survives misunderstandings long enough to teach us something later. Emily came over that evening. Not angry, not calm either, just guarded. She stood in the doorway like someone entering unfamiliar territory. Sandra offered to leave. Emily surprised me. No, she said quietly. Stay. That was the first crack in the wall. We sat at the kitchen table. The letter between us. Emily didn't touch it at first. Is it real? She asked. Yes. Her voice trembled slightly. Mom never told me she was scared. I swallowed. She didn't tell me either. Emily read slowly. Halfway through, her eyes filled. She paused on the line about loneliness. I remember that time, she whispered. You were both distant. She wasn't accusing, just remembering. I thought you were unhappy, she said to me quietly. I admitted. The honesty surprised even me. Not because of her, because of myself. That truth took decades to form. Emily wiped her eyes. So Sandra wasn't what I thought. No, I said gently. She was someone your mom trusted when I wasn't listening. Sandra's voice was soft. I never wanted to be part of your grief story. Emily looked at her for a long moment. I just didn't want Dad to be fooled. That sentence hurt, but it also meant something important. She was protecting me. The roles had shifted. I wasn't fooled, I said quietly. I was just afraid of looking back honestly. The room grew quiet again. But this time it wasn't tension. It was processing. Emily leaned back in her chair. For years, I thought Mom died thinking she wasn't enough. Her voice cracked slightly. That thought had been living inside her. Quietly. All this time. She didn't, I said firmly. She died loving us. Even when we misunderstood each other. Sandra reached across the table. Not to claim space, just to offer it. Emily didn't pull away. I guess I was angry at the wrong person, Emily said. No, I replied. You were grieving. Grief looks like anger sometimes. Sometimes it looks like suspicion. Sometimes it looks like silence. Later that night, after Emily left, I stood alone in the kitchen. The same kitchen where the story began. Only now it felt different. Not threatened. Clear. I thought about how easily we build stories in our heads. About people. About moments. About intentions. And how long we defend them before questioning them. Sandra came and stood beside me. You okay? She asked. I nodded slowly. I think I finally am. The next Sunday, Emily invited us to dinner. It wasn't dramatic. There were no grand apologies. Just 3 people trying again. And sometimes that's what healing looks like. Not fireworks. Just showing up. Final truth. We don't lose people only when they die. Sometimes we lose them slowly through silence. Through assumptions. Through pride. But if we're lucky, truth waits long enough for us to come back to it. My daughter thought she discovered a betrayal. Instead, she uncovered something far more difficult. The version of our past we were all too afraid to question. And in finally telling the truth, we didn't lose anyone. We found each other again.